Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. I'm Nerdic Steve, and today I'm joined by Mike Shea, also known as Sly Flourish. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thank you for
Uh,
having me on.
well, it's a pleasure. It's been a while since we've chatted. You've been on, I think, at least once before.
Yep.
What's new? And also, before we get into that, I guess if you could be so kind to introduce yourself and tell
Sure.
people a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So my name is Mike Shea. I write D&D stuff. I started off with a website called Sly Flourish, which is still going. It's still like the central hub of the stuff that I do. And I used to just write an article every week to help dungeon masters run D&D games. And then I started writing books. I started small with a book called DM Tips, and then another one called Epic Tier D&D Games. This is during the fourth edition era of D&D. And then I wrote a book called The Lazy Dungeon Master, and that book got to be pretty popular. I was happy with it. It was about how to spend less time preparing for your game and still get more out of your game in that process. Something that I had heard from a lot of DMs and from a kind of a bunch of research that I had done aimed towards this idea that less prep can actually be better than more prep. So that book was popular. I kind of worked with that, wrote some other books, and then went back to the topic again and said, let me take another kind of deeper look in. It's been a few years. And I wrote another book called Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, which is even more popular than the original Lazy Dungeon Master, which is good. It's nice when your new book is more popular than your old book. And that one kind of focused down even more, said, here are 8 steps that you can follow. This is based on talking to lots of DMs about how they do things. If we narrow it down to what the most important things are, what are they? And here they are. And that got a lot of resonance as well. A lot of people have used it. I've gotten, fair bit. I've gotten shockingly little feedback that said, I tried your 8 steps and they suck and my game fell apart and now I hate the hobby. It doesn't mean it hasn't happened.
Yeah,
It just means I haven't heard about
they're
it.
just not in the hobby anymore to tell you about it.
But given the vitriol that can
Yeah,
exist in our hobby, sometimes I would expect I'd hear more. And I know there are people that are definitely not on board. I know there are people
yeah,
that hate the idea of the lazy dungeon master at all. They're like, we're not lazy, we work really hard. And I'm like, you're missing the point, right? Like,
yeah.
it ain't about being lazy, it's about being efficient. But efficient DM doesn't stick as well as lazy DM. So
Did you
um
have to fight the urge to do lazy, lazier, and laziest?
well, no, but there was a lot of talk about what the sequel to what the sequel to the Lazy Dungeon Master would be, and
Mm.
Revenge of the Lazy Dungeon Master, the Lazy Dungeon Master Strikes Back. We went through a whole bunch of different different titles and stuck to Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, which I think works out. So, but yeah, it's gonna be a problem if I come up with another one. So
So
yeah.
you haven't run out of ideas or things to talk about for dungeon mastering?
No, I don't know that I ever will. It's interesting. When I was first doing Sly Flourish, and the Twitter was just a new thing, right? Twitter was just coming up, and I thought to myself, one of the things I can do is I can do a daily D&D tip on Twitter, right? And I talked to my wife about it. She's like, "Are you really going to be able to come up with that many tips?" Right. And I was like, I don't know, like, let's start throwing them out and see. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
And I said, like, I guess I did them 7 days a week for a while. And then I'm like, well, no one reads on weekends. So let me just stick to 5 days a week. But then I went back to 7 days a week. And it turns out I've been doing that for 10 years. I've got thousands and thousands of them. And, like, I mean, some of them are cyclic, like some of them I'll come back to. But the hobby is basically a limitless hobby, right? Like we can get into this in so many facets in so many ways that there's so many different like nuances. It has so much variance that there's always little things that we can kind of pick up and work with, even though there's sort of like big components that we know are important. There's also so many like small things that we can do that kind of just nudge our game in different good directions. So yeah, I don't think I'll ever not have something to write about. However, I don't think my process, like there was a process change between the original Lazy Dungeon Master and Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. And I am pleased that so far there has not been another shift in that process. Like I look back at the original steps from Return or from the original steps from Lazy Dungeon Master, and I wasn't even following them anymore. Like they work and
yeah.
people like them, but I wasn't doing it that way anymore. But now with Return, I've been doing it that way for 3 years, right? I don't know if I've run 1,000 games, but I've run many hundreds of games. And I use those steps every day or every time I'm doing my prep, and they work. And lots of other people have come back and said, "Oh yeah, I use these steps and they work." So I don't think that process has to change too much unless something radically different happens with the game. And given that it's a almost 50-year-old game at this point, I don't know that we're going to see such major shifts that those processes will break down.
Well, it just makes sense that your approach is going to evolve over time, right?
Sure. Yep.
You were always being inundated, introduced to new ideas, new concepts, and ways of doing things, and I think like the hallmark of someone who can grow is the ability to reevaluate our ideas and the way we do things.
Absolutely.
Based off of new information and not being like
Yep.
mired in, no, this is how I've always done it. We'll never do it a different way again.
Right.
So, quick reminder, folks, there are links in the description to find Mike Shea across the interwebs. Go check them out, including a Kickstarter you have going on right now for your latest incarnation of the Lazy Dungeon Master. I read the first one, and then the second one, I don't know if I've read it or if I listened to it on audiobook or both.
Yep. Colby Elliott did the narration for the audiobook. Yeah.
But you articulated things that like our group had been gravitating for years, and we didn't really have a way to articulate it other than we were spending all this time working on stuff that we would never use, and so we stopped. Right. and usually like the epiphany happens when like you just have like a busy week, and
right,
like,
oh man, I didn't have any time. Yeah, right.
And you just run it, and you just didn't really prepare anything, and then this weird thing happens where like your players are like, that was the best session ever. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty sure it had to suck. I didn't do anything. So
yeah, that's a common, I mean, there are memes about it, right? Like the idea of like, oh, the players, I built this whole thing and the players went left and we avoided it. Like it's been in TV shows, like the Community had that happen, right? And so that idea of like the game is going to go in a direction you're not prepared for is well trod, well known ground. Yeah, well trod ground. And so then it's like, well, what do you prepare? Like, you can't just not prepare anything, right? So this idea that like prepare less and your game is better, that doesn't meet this point where zero preparation is going to be an infinitely awesome game, right? It doesn't quite work that way, but it seems to be a matter of like what are the kinds of things you prepare. And this particular almost contradictory idea of preparing to improvise. And people are like, how can you prepare to improvise? Like that seems like it can't. And you're like, well, no, it actually does work. Like there are things you can do to prepare to improvise. And the metaphor I've been using a lot is this idea of like cooking at the table, almost like you're at a hibachi grill, right? And instead of having a full meal come out to you already done, you instead have a chef who shows up at your table with little dishes of all of the different things that have been prepared to be cooked, prepared to be improvised, and all these little dishes have all these different things, and then they're flipping around and putting them together, and things are changing, and all the meals being cooked at the table rather than being cooked back in the kitchen. And I think when I look at like Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master, the steps that are in there, each of those steps are like that little bowl of stuff, right? You have your secrets and clues bowl, which are what are the 10 things that my characters can discover in the next game. I don't know where they're going to discover them. I don't know how they're going to discover them, but they may or even if they're going to discover all of them or not, right? But I've got these ready, and as soon as they go into like an old tomb and they blow the cobwebs off and they see a mosaic, I can whip out one of those secrets and tie it to the mosaic on the wall. And it's done. And it doesn't matter like what direction they go. Like some of these secrets are going to come out. Do they interrogate the prisoner and they learn stuff there? Do they pick up an old sword and there's weird, ancient glyphs on the sword that the wizard can read and that tells him something? So there's all of these little dishes, like the monster dish, right? I don't know what monsters are going to show up in what rooms and what numbers, but I know that these are the kinds of monsters that typically show up in this area. So I'm going to keep those handy. And then when the circumstances allow it, I will throw some of those monsters into the ring. Right. So I think that process works pretty well. I know that it certainly has been working for me. I've been using it, and I feel pretty good about what happens during the games. Right. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from people that say that it's kind of turned around. But I think the real value that is provided for a lot of people is being able to fit D&D into their lives, which was really what I was trying to aim for. That we're all busy, right? And everybody's got responsibilities and everybody's got all these other things going on. And it's like, if I have to spend, 3 hours of prep per hour of gameplay, I'm never going to run a game. So this is a way to say like, well, what if you only have 30 minutes? Like, what can you get done in 30 minutes? And I think that really helps for people.
For sure. It's like, one of the things, like one of the philosophies I have is like, nothing in a game happens until it actually happens.
Yep.
And, I know there's just players and DMs get stuck on that, and they're just like, somehow in their mind, it's like cheating. They need like these rigid things in place.
Right.
Which leads to that trap of creating things that your players are not going to interact with, and or just general less fun times. Just rather figure out like what are the things I want to happen during this session,
Right.
and how they happen I'll just leave up to the players, right? So when it comes up, you can just throw it out there, or if there's a lull, boom, and random encounter.
Hmm.
um so it's more like building the sandbox they're going to play in, and laying out all the toys, kind of like you mentioned, with the food analogy, with the hibachi analogy. You're just laying everything out,
Hmm.
and at least when they go to a specific place in that sandbox, you're like, oh well, you're not completely unprepared, because you're like, oh, I need a blacksmith. I didn't think they were going to go in town and go look for a blacksmith, but that's what they're doing. But you have your
Right.
name of your chart of NPCs or tavern names or whatever,
Yep.
the things that can stump you. Just having those, or you talk about in some of your previous works, is like you don't really need to build encounters, because experts have already done it. Just
Mhm.
pull out the whole encounter and drop it in your game.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
So Rivers wants to know, when did you start playing D&D?
I think it was about 1988 or 89. I started with second edition when I was in my teens in high school, and I had already been playing like Pool of Radiance and Curse of the Azerbaijan and the old gold box SSI games, and that got me into like the math of D&D. And I was like, "What's that go? Like, I got to
Yeah.
learn this. This is some cool archaic info. Like, why is armor class going down instead of up?" And so I picked up a player's handbook to try to understand the mechanics that were going on in this game I was playing. And I liked that enough that I was like, I got to drag some friends of mine into
Yeah.
this. And some of them had played like first edition D&D when they were pretty young. So well, we had a group together, and I think back, and I actually think like I was terrible, obviously. Like nobody's a great DM when they, like they never heard anybody play before or anything like that. But I think back fondly on the game. It was like a big campaign set in the Dalelands in Forgotten Realms, and they fought Lord Manshun from the Zinterim. The
Yeah.
old hardcore Zinterim was their main villain, and I think back fondly on some of the scenes that happened in there. Like, they faced Manshun, and he broke his staff of the Magi when it was fully charged and blew up half a Zental keep, right? And
As you do.
teleported the characters to the nine hells, So fun, it was really fun stuff. And then I kind of got out of it and got back into it in college a bit, played some more second edition in college, then fell out of it, and then got back into it again after I had a job, and that was in third edition. And so I played a bunch of third edition with some friends. And I think about that point was when I started playing regularly and didn't stop. It didn't kind of come in and out and came in and out. So lately I've probably been playing about 20-ish. I would say about 20-ish years. I think that's about right. It's pretty close. Since third edition, played through third edition, played through fourth edition, and now into fifth edition. So yeah, it's been fun.
Challenger says they've got the Curse of the Azerbaijan installed on their computer right now.
Yeah, right. It's a fun one. Like I still go back and think about some of the encounters that were in there. There was one encounter, I think it was in Pool of Radiance, where you fought a single drow brute who drank a bunch of potions right before you went in to fight him. So he had like haste and giant strength and all this stuff. And I just remember that one drow just kicking the crap out of us because I didn't know how to face him. Like I didn't know you could like cast a spell magic and get rid of a bunch of his buffs because I didn't know what was going on. But I still remember that encounter. I still remember the final encounter.
A drow juicer, nice.
He was, yeah. He just downed. They even said like the narration was he's at a stairwell, right? And you're in the stairwell, and a bunch of potion bottles fall down the stairs that he just drank. And yeah, it was definitely
so the foreshadowing was there and everything.
It was. It made sense, but I was like, why is this one dude just killing me? He'd go up and hit you 4 times for tons of damage. It was really ridiculous. But we had saves, so we could just click save and quick load and try it again.
My favorite monster, the haste, is a quickling.
That's pretty crazy. The one we did back then, I think it worked back then, was hasting the there's all these sort of like broken combinations. And even now, like my Wednesday group just had a combo of like the paladin cast Moonbeam, then was polymorphed into a mammoth, and then the mammoth drank a speed potion, and then went up and a guy came back from Banish, and he came back from Banish. He landed in a pool of grease that one of the other characters had laid out, slipped on the grease, fell down, got hit by the Moonbeam, and then the mammoth ran over and was speeded up and stomped on him 3 times and killed him outright. And they then started referring to that as the Moonbeam Speed Mammoth maneuver, right? And from now on, that's how we're facing battles from now on, right? Like, the Banish Moonbeam Speed Mammoth maneuver. And so back then it was the polymorph into a Hydra and then hasten the Hydra, and it had like 36 attacks.
Yeah, because back then, right? Then haste,
right? If the haste is double everything. So yeah, if you can polymorph yourself into like an 8-headed Hydra, you could get 16 attacks.
Oh my god,
it was way better than being a character.
That's like an E Honda, like
So it's kind of funny that these maneuvers still occur, right? There's always that like, oh, if we do these series of events. So my poor abominable Yeti never had a chance, right?
5e has greatly reduced the number of that happening.
I think so. Yeah, they're still there, but and in that case, it was like, hey, it was so awesome. My only worry is when it happens twice, right? Like if it happens once, that's really cool. If it happens all the time, like this is gonna get really boring really fast.
Yeah. Then you have to start like thinking of counters and changing things up.
Yeah, right. That's
like,
right. And
right.
that's the kind of mental process I did a lot in 4th edition that I try not to do at all in 5th. Of like, I don't want to think about things from the point of view of how do I challenge the characters. I get in a lot of debates with friends of mine about this. My friend Teo Sabadi and I debate about this a lot. And like, I care about challenge when it's like a boss fight, right? If you're facing like the main villain and you kind of want this big climactic encounter, but almost every other time I just say like, what monsters make sense for the situation? Am I going to inadvertently kill the characters? And if not, let's let it go. Right. Let's see how it comes. And if they, banish, grease, Moonbeam, polymorph into mammoths, drink a potion and defeat it in one turn, good on them. Right.
I mean it more from the stance of not just like, oh, my players can do this, so this is what I'm going to do. But if you just vary your encounters more, that tends to work itself out.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
right. Yep.
Yeah, sure. The mammoth thing works great if you're always in an open space where you can do that. But, every once in a while, maybe things are a little more confined or you're being attacked from above.
You'll telejib yourself like in Doom, right? You're like, oh, I'm in a hallway. Boom. Oh, my God. What happened? We tried polymorphing a mammoth and the room was too small. And now he exploded.
So like, just by like varying things up and trying not to do the same thing and also it just makes encounters more exciting if there's just more things to interact with.
Yeah.
Anyway, I feel the same way. Like, I don't care if my players, trash my monsters. Like, I've fallen victim to banishment more times than I care to right. Especially if you're using a monster that is an extraplanar monster, and it's just like
it's just gone.
It's just gone. I'm like, well, that was anticlimactic, right? And I'm terrible at rolling dice, and I generally roll them in the open. So like, oh, you just banished that demon. I guess he's gone, and it was the only monster there.
I think it's about 7th level. It probably happens a little bit earlier when you have things like Hypnotic Pattern, but I think that like 7th level is the first time where a single big monster isn't usually enough unless it's legendary. Like it's the first time when you need legendary in order to not be like taken out in a single turn. And it's an interesting point. That 7th level turn is really an interesting point. As one of my friends in my Sunday game, I'm lucky that in my Sunday game, I think everybody there is a DM except me, except one other person, right? Like they all DM other games, so they're all like aware of the fact that they're doing things that might not be great fun and curb their enthusiasm on it. And he just calls it the 7th level shenanigans, right? And he's like, at 7th level, all the shenanigans come out. That's when you see all these different sort of stacked things, and it's true. And it's like, well, if, so then you got to recognize, like, okay, an abominable Yeti is not going to be much, potentially not much of a threat, right? If it's against 7th level characters, because they can take it out with a single shot, and that's fine.
Challenger, they didn't use the potion miscibility tables in there. For the drow.
The drow, right. Like another one that like, wow, he drank 3 potions and exploded. Right. Like turned into a pot of flowers. Like what happened?
Yeah. But that doesn't affect bad guys anyway. Everybody knows that.
Right. Yeah. NPCs like, oh, I rolled that ahead of time. He's fine.
So Dave wants to know what's next for lazy DMing. I mean, there's a Kickstarter right now.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, right.
So tell us about that a little bit. We haven't really even touched on it other than you have another thing going on.
Sure. Yeah, and there's parts of it that I think get into this conversation we've been having. So the Lazy DM's Companion is a book of guidelines and inspiration to help people prepare and run their D&D games. So it's a level of it's a level of detail lower than the material that's in Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. All three books are meant to kind of work together. There's Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, the Lazy Dungeon Master's workbook, Lazy DM's workbook, and the Lazy DM's Companion. Return is your sit back in your armchair, read it, internalize some of the ideas that are there, think about how to do your prep and go, that's really great, and then set it aside. And maybe you read it like every 6 months or so if you want to, or you review it and stuff like that. The workbook is like a bunch of stuff to help you improvise your game when you're actually running the game at the table. It's a bunch of tables and charts. It's a bunch of, like imagine like a 48-page DM screen. Right. That's kind of what the workbook is intended to be. And then the companion is supposed to sit there when you're actually doing your prep. It's supposed to help you. It gives you a bunch of tools like, just like we were talking about, like, you want to mix up your encounter types. So what if you want to run 50 skeletons? Right. Well, how do you run 50 skeletons? Right. The Dungeon Master's Guide has a little bit of advice, but not a lot. This one has better advice about here's a way to run 50 skeletons and it's not too terrible. Here's a way to just very quickly benchmark whether or not a battle might be deadly or not without having to do a bunch of crazy math. Or here's a really quick chart for rolling up treasure that's a little bit easier than rolling on all the tables that are inside the DMG. So it's got a bunch of like guidelines like that, but then it also has random generators for particular situations. So if you are exploring the Feywild, there's a whole page of like, here are 5 different tables of Feywild things that you could roll on to kind of generate an interesting Feywild journey, right? There's some that are thematic adventures. So if you want to run an adventure that's like based on the movie Seven Samurai, where the heroes are defending a town from a bunch of marauders, this one has like, who are the marauders? What's interesting about the town? Where do the marauders lair? What dark secret do the villagers have? And you can kind of roll on these and generate all different kinds of adventures that are still built around that one single theme. So it's a 64-page book. It's going to be soft cover. Every page is its own thing. So you can actually, with the PDF, and I think everybody that backs it gets the PDF, you can print just like the one you want right now, right? You don't have to have the whole book in front of you. But every page is offering either one of these one-page guidelines or one of these inspirational generators to help build all kinds of things. How do you generate villains? How to generate weird cults? How to generate strange gods? How to generate all different kinds of ways to do travel, all kinds of stuff like that. So really try to be stripped down and make it easy and fast for people to be able to drop this stuff in your game. It definitely hangs on to that lazy word.
What's your favorite table?
Oh man, that's tough. Probably the new stress effects table. So, the old Dungeon Master's Guide had the madness table. The idea of a madness table is a little bit, little problematic these days. But the idea of a stress effect of like, if you see Demogorgon, what does that do to you, right? Things are not going to go right in your head when you witness things that are outside of the bounds of what a mortal mind can comprehend. Your mind does things. So the Dungeon Master's Guide has I think 6 or 8 different options, on a D100 table. And I said, I used it all the time. Like I ran it with Out of the Abyss and I used it all the time, but there was kind of a limited number. So I said, what if we did 20 and had 20 different options? And there's a bunch of different ways of using these 20 options. Everything from like blood starts coming at, you start crying blood. I think one of my favorites is always like you go to your happy place, right? And then you get to say like, where's your happy place, right? As a character, where does when you look at Orcus, eviscerating one of your friends, and your mind just rebels against this idea, where do you go, right? What's it like? And it's like, oh, I go to my old leather chair and my comfortable inn, and I'm reading my favorite book with a cup of cocoa. And I'm like, there you are, And so I love that table a lot. I think I used it a lot. I've used it recently, when they were fighting like the Chardalon. I don't want to say. When they were fighting a particular monster inside an adventure I was running recently, the monster itself was emanating this sort of, this sort of twisted effect that's just racking the minds of the people who are around it. And we rolled a lot on that and what kind of weird effect you have. So it's so much better than saying like you're stunned or you're frightened. Way better is saying like, all of your bones feel like they're cracking, right? Like all of your bones feel like they're breaking in your body at once and you collapse to the ground, right? It's way more interesting and thematic, even though the result is you're stunned, right? So I like that table a lot. It's my favorite. I don't know, but it comes to mind.
Is that your player's least favorite though?
I mean, they like it better than being stunned because at least there's a story, right?
Yeah, they get to contribute.
Yeah, and so I actually was working on it yesterday that like there's a mechanical, you don't have to use the mechanical component. So you could have it that like if there's an evil sword and someone picks it up, you can have the effect without having it a mechanical effect, right? They just, they just hear this warbling tune that starts to just make them quiver, right? And they don't know what that tune is. Well, you don't say, and you're stunned. You could just have that happen, right? And it's just purely thematic. But if you want, you can add this effect that says, no, you're actually stunned for a minute. Or you make a saving throw, right? You make a wisdom saving throw or a charisma saving throw, I can't remember which. And you're stunned. And then you can take psychic damage to break the stun. So if you don't want to be stunned and you want to act, you can instead take pure psychic damage. And that's sort of like shatter out of whatever the thing was that was binding you. It hurts like hell, but now you're out and now you can control yourself again. So there's a nice sort of
inflicted consequences.
You're right. So it's this perfect, like, well, do you want to not do anything this turn, or do you want to take psychic damage and be able to do stuff? And the problem I had is I was doing a D6 per level and no one could survive the damage. Like everyone's like, I have to take 22 points of damage. Like I only have 7 hit points left. And you're like, well, so I've reduced it now to 1d8 per every other level. So it's not quite as you wanted enough that like it's a real penalty. And no one's like, oh, sure, 8 damage. I'll take that. Right. You want it to matter, but you don't want it to matter so much. That's like, well, now you've given me the choice of being down at 0 or stunned. And both of them are terrible. Right.
So Brian wants to know, how do you make the leap from my own homebrew notes and designs into getting them in an acceptable format for sharing online and in a place that is friendly for small indie design sharing?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'll answer that specific question. There's another one, which is I think sometimes DMs get stuck around the idea that they think they're going to publish their notes for their game. Right. And I think, and what it ends up happening, I think that gets into the prep cycle of you're prepping a lot, right? And you're prepping all this stuff because you're almost building it as though you're going to hand it to someone else to run. When for our own games, we really don't need to do that much work, right? Like if we could just get enough on our page to fire off our memory about what we were thinking about when we were writing it down, we don't need to write down a whole lot of stuff. So like people that write their own read aloud text, for example, it's like you probably don't need to write your own read aloud text, or people that generate their own random encounter tables, right? And it's like, yeah, it's not bad. You probably don't want a big one because you're going to write a lot of stuff you're never actually going to use.
Yeah.
Right. So you probably don't want to spend on that. But then certainly we're all designers, right? Like DMs are designers. We're just designers for 6, instead of like designers for a larger community. So I think it's actually can be a pretty big step to go from the point of taking your homebrew stuff and making it publishable enough that people will like it. No one owes you their love, right? Like nobody out there signed a contract with you that says if you put your stuff out, they have to enjoy it. You have to kind of earn that, and it can be tough. I've had lots of stuff that I've done that nobody's liked, right? And so you just I can't blame them for that. So you really got to think about like, well, what am I offering? What am I offering everybody else? What am I offering them that is making their life better? Either an imaginative idea that hasn't come about before, or I think a lot of like tools that make it easier to run games is that's my racket, right? That's like I've been spending a lot of time trying to figure out like what can I offer people that will make it easier for them to run games. So I think really asking yourself, getting out of the fact that you love this thing and saying, why would anybody who doesn't know me love this? Like why, and what else are they, what else is demanding their attention for it? I think is a big one. But that said, we also live in the internet age, which means you can publish anything you want, right? Like no one's in your way. The good news is nobody can stop you from doing it, right? You don't owe anybody anything. And no one, generally speaking, like you can't write your Forgotten Realms stuff and then post it on Google Drive, right? But you can't put it on the DMs Guild. But short of using other people's IP, there are other people's intellectual property, these things like the Forgotten Realms or Eberron or stuff like that. If you're building your own world and your own characters and your own story, no one's in your way, right? No one is preventing you from doing that. On the same side, nobody owes you their love, right? Nobody right? And those are two hard sides. There's one is very freeing, and one is very demoralizing, right? But both are true, right?
Yeah,
I don't know if both are true. I think it's my opinion, right?
It's kind of like Nike, right? Just do it, and if it's terrible,
yeah, a little bit, right? And that's the thing. Like,
not.
just right. I will give my one, what I think to be a valuable tip for somebody that's getting into producing, into making RPG products. And this is something that I've heard from a lot of people. It's something that I have a Discord server where a bunch of other creators and I hang out, and it's just focused on talking about this. And that's set up an email newsletter. So the social media platform of the future is email, right? Like, that's where the power lies. And Twitter and TikTok and YouTube and whatever.
All people.
All of the social platforms that exist. The one that you control, the social media platform that you can build and you can control is as an email newsletter. And in my own, I've done a lot of research and a lot of study. When I'm done with the Kickstarter, I'll be able to look at a lot of material to figure this out. And somebody reading your email is on the order of 20 to 30 times more effective at getting attention on something than somebody reading your tweet. Right. And that's even if they read your tweet. And nowadays, the Twitter algorithm is set so that they may or may not read your tweet, particularly if you're linking to something else. And you'll see this if you look at like RPG producers on Twitter. There's a lot of this monkeying around where people, and I've done it, right? I'm not insulting people doing it, because I do it, which is you post a tweet that doesn't have a link, and then in the thread you post the link. And that way Twitter is like, they'll promote the first one and not the second one, but it's okay because the first one leads to the second one. So there's all this like gaming of the system you have to do in order to get people to look at your stuff on Twitter. And the reason why is Twitter doesn't want you to leave Twitter, right? Yeah. They want you to stay with Twitter. Same with YouTube, same with TikTok,
every
same
platform.
With Instagram, all of these. But email, there's no single platform, right? You can go to many different vendors. If you go to MailChimp and you build up an email list in MailChimp, you can move that email list to another provider. And that email list, a bunch of people who said they like your stuff enough that they're willing to give you their email address. Yeah. That's a social media platform you own. And it's really effective at getting people to look at your stuff, right? So I produce a lot of things for them. So anybody that was just getting started, it is the one thing I look back and go, man, 10 years ago, I wish I'd done that. Right. And the fact that I only did it in the last last year or two.
Yeah.
That
I will say,
right.
If you do build an email list and move it somewhere, make sure you know the terms of service of everyone involved. Because I had a friend that decided he wanted to use a different company. So he just emailed everybody on his list and said, hey, I'm moving over here if you keep wanting to follow me, and did like all the procedures that you would normally do if you're going cold.
Right.
But he used it on his warm list. And the company's like, we just noticed you got a bunch of new subscribers to your list. How did that happen? So he just told them because he didn't think he did anything wrong. And they're like, oh, you can't do that. And then that's how he lost like a 20,000 email list forever.
Oh my God. Because he'd already pulled it out of the other group.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I have not done it. So maybe you know this better than I do, but I think I can export my list out of one provider and import it into another provider.
Yeah. And also like this happened many years ago. So the rules may have changed as well.
Yeah. I think like the main question is like, has that person actually said they want to be part of your list or not?
Yeah.
If they have, I don't think they care where the emails are coming from. Right. Like
the person doesn't. Yeah.
The person doesn't, and you don't.
Different companies have different
company. That's probably very true. Yeah, that's very true.
But,
so yeah, I think if I was a producer, I would do that. And you're only going to have like 5 people at first, right? It's going to be hard to get people to subscribe to your list, but more will come, and then that gets cyclic. And if you're giving them stuff, if you're making things, if you're taking your campaign notes and you're turning them into something that's useful, and you're really thinking to yourself, like, how is this useful to somebody else, right? Don't put out you can, right? You can put out whatever you want. But you can't expect people are going to love it if it's a Word document that isn't edited, right? Like, guess what? We all have Word documents that aren't edited, right? That we can use. So, yeah. So I don't know. I'm not offering the most like, yay, get out there and and go, because it's hard, right? It's getting attention to products is hard.
Ultimately, it just comes down to like, how do you build an audience, right? To engage with whatever you're doing,
right. And take 10 years and be lucky.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of them. And so it's like, that's what's hard about being any kind of content creator, whether it's on YouTube or creating products. It's like, how do you get people to find your stuff?
Right.
There's this whole other skill set you have to learn. There's nothing to do with the thing you
constantly
wanted to do
changes.
to begin with. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like I didn't want to do YouTube videos, and now I'm shooting 5 YouTube videos a week. Right? Like I never got into this, and here I am. Right. And it's because that turned out to be a way more effective way of getting out the kind of stuff that I want to talk about than almost any other social media platform. Right. So and then
it's just like finding the places you actually like to hang out. So like, I'd always recommend like to start with places where you're already hanging out and enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because when you try to branch out to other places, you don't enjoy it. It's just going to be work.
It may not stick. Yeah. Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. Like a couple of platforms that I just adore are Discord and Patreon. Right. That like, so Discord is now where I spend most of my time. Right. And Patreon, I have found to be a really great way of connecting, with people who like my stuff enough to throw a couple bucks my way a month. And then I can really try to give them as much good stuff as possible. Right. They finance things that I wouldn't normally do, and I can give it to them. And then they come into the Discord and we're hanging out. It ends up building probably a little bit of a insular community. Yeah. More so than you would get if you're like on the much larger Twitter side, but at least you have like-minded, people that kind of like the thing that you're talking about. Tends to work well. So I've found, Patreon was something else that I came to late. I don't think I regret that as much as like not having a newsletter. But it turned out to be that's a really, really great place to go. Really great place. If I feel really good about making stuff for them, I try to make sure like my Patreon is cheap, like it's $2 a month, but I try to make sure they get good, they get good value for that. And I think they feel.
Yeah, you got a lot of patrons. So
yeah, right. It's worked out. And yeah, that's another one where like YouTube fed that, right? That like I wasn't really into YouTube a year ago. And I had a channel and I did some small stuff, but I kind of put more into that. And now 40% of the people that are going to Patreon came from YouTube. It's the highest number, more than my website, more than Twitter, more than anywhere else.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's probably where most of our patrons come from. Although it's real, like our Patreon's really weird. I never know what those people want over there. And like, they just like give and don't interact with us. It's so bizarre.
Yeah. They just, that's great, right? They like you. They like you. They like what you're doing. And that's the way I do it. Yeah. And then like, something that I've started doing, I just love, right, is I do a monthly Q&A on the Patreon where every month I'll put up a post saying, here's this month's Q&A, ask any question you want. And then I will do a YouTube show where I go over those questions. And, that has been a lot of fun, really good questions, really good stuff. It's been a great way to work with that.
So Brian wants to know, let's get serious now. What's which dragon is the best dragon?
Man, I just saw the picture of the Elder Brain Dragon that's in Fizban's treasury. That one looks pretty, this is probably a little bit of a new, probably, oh yeah, look at you. Fancy. Yeah, I'm not on that list.
There is a lot of like cool things in here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that book. But I saw the picture of the Elder Brain Dragon.
Yeah.
And
that was going around a lot.
I know it's going around a lot, and that's probably a little bit of like the shiny new thing, so what's like the best dragon? I don't know. And then it's like, well, you're talking dragon type, you're talking dragon. And one of my favorite dragons, I have 2 favorite dragons, which is Klauth and Imrith, right? Two of the dragons that are both involved in Storm King's Thunder. And I decided to kind of just double down and triple down on them being important factors in this adventure. And both of them are archmages. So you have 2 2,000-year-old dragon archmages, and they're in a cold war with one another, right? And like they don't want to fight because someone's going to die, and neither of them want that exactly.
Yeah.
But they're more than happy to have a group of adventurers work between the 2 of them. And just the amount of power that I threw at these guys, the amount of stuff that they had. And when the characters were fighting Imrith, and she cloned herself. So they had a dragon clone they had to fight, right? They had a simulacrum. She would make regular simulacrums of herself. So there would be these ancient, there were these ancient blue dragons attacking their airship, and they'd kill it and it would turn into snow and fall away. They're like, oh my God, that wasn't even her. Like we got our asses kicked and it wasn't even her, right? And we thought it was her and it wasn't.
Yeah.
And then, like, you know, in a final battle, it was her and a simulacrum, and they didn't know which one was which. So they were fighting two ancient dragons at the same time, one of which is hurling spells, and the other one is breathing and clawing and biting. And it was one dragon. And so I just love that, you know. I mean, that was like, they were like 16th or 17th level when they fought her. And
Nice.
it was just, yeah. And just getting into their minds too. Like, how do dragons think? And like, how do, you know, like she had spies, and she knew what the characters wanted. And so, you know, she had secretly kidnapped one of the best friends of one of the characters. And the character thought that the person was dead. Right. And then when the characters came in to confront her, there was a portal to hell in the middle of the room with like an amber crystal with the friend in it that was clearly alive. And as the battle started, she dropped the crystal through the portal into hell, and that character jumped right in the portal to go save their friend, and they were gone. And she's like, well, that was the easiest way to get rid of that person I ever thought of. Right. And it's just this tremendous like way of shaking up the whole, you know, that idea of just thinking like a 1,000-year-old dragon is really fun. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
So Imrith is probably the favorite dragon I've ever run. And I ran her for 2 years, right? She was my NPC for 2 years.
I think that's part of it too, is like not just using them as just another monster, right? And that's
it's not
I'm
a
very
step.
like hesitant
Right.
to throw dragons in, because like I just want them to feel special, right? Like,
right.
And not be like, oh, I killed an owlbear, I killed a dragon, you know.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's real easy to sort of, you know, it's really hard, right? It's just hard with any powerful villain. Liches are hard, vampires are hard, you know, really smart, because they're smarter than we are. Right? Yes. It's like, I don't know what to do, right? Like, how do you make a dragon
thousands
feel smart?
of years?
Right. I don't know what to do. And it's also like, if you truly go in that direction, it ends up becoming not so much fun, because like a dragon is always going to have the upper hand on the characters, and that's just not a good time. So you want to like balance it. So in that same scenario, Imrith was trying to become a Dracolich, right? And she was building her phylactery, but she was building it out in the astral sea where nobody knew where it was. But the characters found out she was doing this, and they went and destroyed her phylactery before they faced her. So when they faced her, she's all like, look, you're going to kill me. It's not going to matter. I'm going to just regenerate my phylactery. And they're like, we already destroyed it. She's like, you did what? And so that was a fun like one up. And it took like 3 months of adventuring for them to find it and destroy it. Right. It was a really fun thing, but it was this really cool way of like showing how smart she was.
Yeah.
Because they had to unravel her whole plot, and it took them forever before they realized like, okay, now we can actually face her and we actually stand a chance of beating her.
I mean, if you think about it, like you fight a red dragon in its lair, probably a volcano, probably lava and magma laying around, right? Like they could just push you in the lava, or like, you know, basically splash you like it's in a pool, right? And it doesn't even have to really
just splash you in the water.
Yeah.
They have a big kickboard, and they're just using that to make waves at you.
Yeah.
Right. It's too easy. Yeah. It's too easy for some of these creatures to just basically be invulnerable, right? And then that's not fun either. So you have to balance like, okay, I want my boss to feel like a 1,000-year-old super smart boss, but I also want the characters to be victorious at some point, or have an option to be victorious at some point. And it can be tough to balance that.
We were talking about giants, and it's like, what are the tactics that like, I mean, you could use as a GM, and it's just a total dick move, but why wouldn't you? Is like for a giant just to scoop someone and hurl them like a boulder.
Oh, I've done that. Yeah,
away from the combat. It's like, see you in 10 rounds,
like,
buddy.
Yeah, grab them and throw them off a cliff. Yeah, I've definitely done that. I had Strahd do that, right? Like somebody, they had gone through all that work to get the Sun Sword so that they could face Strahd and use this radiant sword against him. Yeah. And he charmed the person who had it, took it from their hand and threw it out the window down a 2,000-foot drop. Right? And they're like, did he just throw the sword out the window that we spent like 3 months getting? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, I guess I'm flying and go try to grab it. Right. And so then it's
that also happened in our Strahd battle. Like not exactly that way. But he kept trying to take it from the person that had it. Yeah. So it just became this like tug of war and this back and forth with the Sun Sword.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy stuff.
It's some good stuff.
Yeah.
So Jamat wants to know, do you ever build a monster stat block from scratch instead of reskinning an existing monster?
As infrequently as humanly possible, right? That the snob the snob factor in me says, if someone's not paying me, why would I make a stat block? Right? Like, you know, and then do you really need to anymore? Like, there's certain aspects where it's like, if you enjoy it, and who's to get in the way of anybody else's fun. But I can tell you, like, back in the 3rd edition days and the 4th edition days, I built a lot of stat blocks to monsters that then didn't run well, and I spent like forever making them. I think Matt Colville talked about this. He said he spent a weekend making a 3rd edition boss.
Templates.
Right?
Templates for a trap,
oh my God. Right. And it's so much stuff and all the math and all this work at the end. And then you've got it. And it's like, oh, I forgot about this. And they get killed. Right. They get killed in like round 1. They get you know, it turned out the moonbeam speed mammoth technique, you know, took care of your carefully generated monster. So I don't feel like that is a really effective use of time to make a game better. I don't think those stats are going to matter so much when it comes to the actual table. I think it's far better. There's a bunch of things you can do before you get there. Like take an existing monster and call it something else, right? And you don't have to change anything at all. 2, like, I'm going to just change a few traits, right? So I'm going to take, and you can mostly do that in your head, you know, a few traits that I'm going to add to turn a monster to another one. Then there's like, well, I'm going to give it a few new abilities, right? I'm going to drop, you know, maybe change some elements and tweak some abilities. Then there's like mashing 2 monsters together. Like, I'm going to take, you know, this set of abilities from monster A and this set of abilities from monster B, mash them together into one monster. All of those are things you can do before you get to, okay, now I'm going to make a monster from scratch, right? And all of those are significantly easier to do.
I mean, and if you use D&D Beyond, it's even easier because you can just like, copy monster.
You can copy a monster and then just go tweak it, right?
Yeah. And like, and that's like a really, that's labor intensive compared to what I normally do. And normally I might just have like 3 web pages open with different monsters on them, and I'm using like this part here and this part there.
Yep, that's
just doing it on the fly.
Yeah, and not to keep pimping my own book, but like in the Lazy DM's Companion, there are a few pages of monster templates. These relatively small things that you can kind of put on top of a monster to say, like, make any monster a ghoul. Like, wouldn't it be cool to have a stone giant ghoul? Like, what would that be like? Or and how to take any of the monsters and turn them into elemental varieties of the same monster. So an acidic ogre, right? I want this weird ogre that's like got acid dripping off of his body when he's walking around, right? And it's all pretty simple stuff with the intent that you can sort of pop that onto a monster and not even really have to write anything down. Just sort of remember, you know, you can almost like, you know, keep in mind what those changes are going to be. The easy one is like anything can be undead if you just say it's undead. Right. You don't have to, you know, you don't have to do a lot of work to make an undead variety, you know, particular undead variety of any given monster. You can just take that same monster and say it's undead. But yeah, I think there's a drive to kind of make new stat blocks. You know, we feel the urge to make new stat blocks. I mean, the other one is like, I don't know about you, but I've got, you know, probably 3,000 or 4,000 monsters in my room right around me right now. Right. And it's like between all of the books that are all the Wizards of the Coast D&D books, right? I've got all those sitting here, but then I've got 3 different Kobold Press monster books.
Kobold Press and Nord Games and Frog Guy Games,
Gaming, right? All these different groups, and in many cases, like, you know, certainly with Kobold Press and like 2C Gaming, like they've play tested the hell out of those monsters. Like, I bet you haven't play tested yours, right? Like when you sit and make one, you know, your first play test is when you're actually throwing it up against your friends.
Yeah.
And it might not work out like you thought it worked, right? So why not go for the ones where, like, I mean, a lot of money went into those monsters, and a lot of energy went into those monsters, a lot of time. Why not use them, right? Why not get all the benefit of all that play testing that occurred?
And the laundry list of abilities is pointless because, like, you're going to see like a couple of them.
Yeah. Well,
that's why, like, the acidic ogre is probably really cool. Very visually. Look, acid's dripping off it.
What does it do? Extra acid damage.
It's burning the ground, right? You don't want to hug that guy.
It's really thematic. Yeah, it's super thematic, but it doesn't have to be mechanically heavy. And that's what we're seeing with this whole new shift for Wizards of the Coast and how they're treating monster design, right? That, like, you know, I think I'm a pretty experienced guy when it comes to running D&D, and I've done it, and I've never run a lich right. You know, I've run liches probably 4 or 5 times in 5th edition, and every time I go, oh, I can't, you know, I forgot about the thing where he can redirect damage to someone else as a lair action, right? Like, I forgot. So, like, there's a good reason why they're taking this new approach of like, let's take that giant laundry list of spells and let's put 2 or 3 good ones, because they're only going to get about 3 rounds of action.
And like, not if it's a non-combat spell, why even put it down, right? Like, because you can just do that as the GM.
Right. Yeah, I'll tell you. Certainly with a lich, right? Like I've never I talk
comprehend
about
languages. Yeah, like when's the last time Lich busted that?
My favorite one, and I think I ended up giving Chris Perkins shit about this on Twitter, and he just like I don't know, probably blocked me, but like a Sarahx, right? So a Sarahx, the Arch Lich, is in Tomb of Annihilation, and one of a Sarahx's abilities is that he can cast 3rd level spells as legendary actions, so he can fire off multiple 3rd level spells in a round, up to 4 of them in a round, right?
Yeah.
And his 3rd level spells were knock and arcane lock. So we're like, wait a minute, so you can walk around and open and close doors? Like
that's it.
A Sarahx, the Archlich, didn't think to memorize lightning bolt or fireball.
Essentially, he just has a garage door opener. He's just like clicking all over the place.
Right. And I said, like, how great would it have been to put him in a room full of doors, and all he's doing is taking the characters and locking them in doors. Like, you're stuck, and he open it up and hit him once and then close it and lock it again. So like, and there, of course we get to like, why'd they do that? Well, because his power rating was such that if you gave him 4 fireballs around, that's so much damage, his challenge rating would have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but he's a Sarahx. He's not going to memorize arcane lock, right? I wrote whole articles about these are the spells that the Sarahx would likely want to memorize. And I had this wonderful thought exercise of like, what is a day? What's a day in the life of a Sarahx like? Like what is he normally doing? And when he wakes up and says, time to memorize my spells, what spell list does he memorize for the kind of things he would do? Right. And it's like, well, he would probably try to unearth like ancient tombs in dead worlds, that haven't been revealed in a million years, but have some artifact he wants. So he's probably going to have Disintegrate, because Disintegrate's a pretty good spell for doing that sort of stuff. So it's really fun to think about. This is a very Keith Amon way of thinking about monsters, right? From like what the monsters know what they're doing. Of like, one of the things I love about Keith's book is that he thinks about what the monster would be like in the world, in the fiction, based on its mechanics. Like, what does having a wisdom of 17 mean about that monster, right? And so I think that like we could do more of that, right? You could do more of thinking about what this monster is going to be like, and less of having arch liches with knock and arcane lock memorized. When you have Disintegrate, guess what Disintegrate does? You don't have to worry about opening doors, right? You could just disintegrate the whole wall, right?
Yeah.
So like, if you have Disintegrate, you don't need knock.
Yeah.
So yeah, fun stuff.
Are you familiar with Noah Atweiler, Counter Monkey Spoonie?
I don't know. I'm not.
So like he's like OG D&D YouTuber, RPG YouTuber, and like he was like the first person that I seen that had like a big following, like 30,000. It was huge, like back when we first started.
Right.
It's got a video called Leaping Wizards. And basically it was like he was running a convention adventure, and like all of his stories are like these very grognardy like stories, but like he's running a game at a convention, and they're like, there's 3 wizards that like jump out of a bush or whatever and attack the party. And he looks at their spell list and it's like, this is useless. Why am I doing? And he like replace, like, cause they're all like, they have like jump as their spell and stuff like that. Right? So he like replaces them. And the video is all about him just basically replacing them and wiping the party, because he picked things like sleep and things that were going to actually be
effective spells. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I stopped running Adventures League games because I had a player who got really mad at me for redoing the spells of the NPC they were facing. It was during Phandelver. Right. And they were fighting, I think it was the Necromancer in like chapter 2 or 3 of Lost Mine of Phandelver. And he was casting spells that the player is like, knew the character didn't have, the NPC didn't have memorized. And I was like, well, first of all, the fact that you've memorized the spell listing of the NPC already shows me we have a problem, right? And 2, I could change any spell I want, right? Like, I'm not a spreadsheet. And so, I was like, if that's kind of what these Adventures League players want from me, that's probably not my thing.
They're just like, dance, monkey, dance.
I mean, that was an unfair comparison, because there's many Adventures League players who love playing, the same kind of D&D that I enjoy playing. This was one where he's like, there was one magic item he wanted. He'd already been through this adventure like 15 times. He's just going through to get that magic item. And I'm like, okay, why don't you just say you have it, right? Like, save yourself 4 hours,
and
go ahead and get it. No one's going to care. So yeah, it was funny. But yeah, I've always felt, and I think I even made like variants of liches where I'm like, they can cast anything. Like, this is one of those, like, the lich is smarter than you, so it's prepared whatever spell it needs because it's smart and I'm not. Right.
Yeah.
So I'll run it that way.
Thank you, Fry Minis, for the super chat. I'm uncomfortable seeing Mike without Notion. I'm not sure what that is.
I can talk all about that. Notion is awesome. But first of all, I want to thank Fry Minis because it was Fry Minis' video preview of Fizzban where he laid it out and went through every page. And I got to take his high def image and snapshot the aspect of Tiamat and then blow it up so I could read it and then study like what the aspect of Tiamat's abilities are like compared to actual Tiamat. And same thing with the great worms, right? There's a great worm stat block.
Yeah, for the chromatic and metallic is super cool. Have you seen the mini?
For Great Worm?
No, for the Tiamat.
Yeah. And
have you seen it in person yet?
I have not seen it in person. No. Is it
good?
Is it
like
it's one of those
I've been super critical about minis in 5e for a long time, especially in the very beginning because their scopes weren't good. They shrunk all the sizes. And like when they I remember like within the first year or two they put out that aspect of Tiamat.
Yeah, I've got that. And it's tiny, right? I ran it just because of its size, right? Because it was
its size and like, and even the scopes weren't that great. And like the same company was doing Paizo and Wizards of the Coast. Right. And the Paizo scopes were so much better.
That's weird. Yeah. It's like they have two different factories. Yeah.
Well, or two different price ranges.
I got this guy recently. I don't know if my camera.
No, they're good now. I think it shifted with
there it goes.
The primed Nazgul Nazguls? Unpainted minis. It seemed like
Nulzers. Yeah.
Nulzers. Yeah. It seemed like things like really stepped up.
Yeah.
With once they hit the scene. But like any mini to ever come out, like I compare it to the Colossal Red Dragon. And
I got my dude right up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my Orcus. I think my favorite was the Orcus mini, the original Orcus mini. Great big Orcus mini with his awesome wand. I've got that in my living room, right? I love that guy.
Yeah, nice.
But yeah, the Tiamat one is great. It's like even I live and breathe D&D, right? Like I'm all about this stuff, and still $500 for minis, put me a little like, I don't know. Like if I was running Rise of Tiamat.
For a mini you may use once too, right?
Right. Like, I know, right? Like it's not really a lot, and that's interesting that they're making a lot of minis and they're making a lot of other accessories with the intention that you're never actually going to use them. It's
that one looks good on your coffee table or your shelf or whatever.
Sure.
I think Ted is working on an article, if he hasn't put it up already, about like how to repurpose that mini to do other things.
Yeah, right.
Maybe just so you can get some more use.
I mean, my trick, I had that Orcus one, which was a ridiculous $80 when I bought it, right?
Yeah,
and that was the most expensive mini they made at that point, and I used them all the time because it was like every time they went into like a cultist statue, there was the Orcus mini was there as a statue, right? Like, you're in the room and there's this big Orcus, then they're like, and they'd always go like, like, is that really Orcus? Like, no, it's statue. Oh my god,
Yeah.
So,
Ted's always been like, why did they make the colossal statue? Because that was like, I guess their first foray into like the big.
Yeah, right. I've got that one, but I've used it. Yeah.
I'm like, because it's got utility, right? It could just be a statue. Yeah. It could be an animated armor, a giant animated armor. It's got, but Tiamat generally is just going to be Tiamat.
Right. They're also flying, which makes it a little harder to use, and because it's like it can't be a statue and be in the air.
Yeah.
Like. So, but Notion, so Notion is, if you're familiar with OneNote, Notion is sort of like OneNote. Notion, it's Notion.io, I think is the URL.
Okay.
Notion.so, and it's a notebook. It's an online notebook app that uses Markdown very heavily, and has all kinds of fun functions and features like being able to build small databases of your own in the background and stuff like that. So it was into COVID, like a couple months into COVID. So like April or May of last year of 2020, when I went from using text pages to do my prep to using Notion, mostly because one of my players said, have you tried Notion? It's really awesome. You should use it. And I said, let me try it out. And I tried it out and I loved it. And I ended up building like a lazy DM template, a lazy DM campaign template in Notion that has like, one page for each of your sessions. And it has like this database of cards for like NPCs, locations, villains, items and stuff. And you can sort of just, it's like the old hypertext. If you remember hypertext from a million years ago on Apple, right? This idea of building your own wiki, right? Your own sort of in-depth, deep web wiki. But you can drop images in there really easily. It's just this wonderful, it's really fast. It's really wonderful. It's clients on everything. It's on your phone. It's on iPad. It's on the web. It has local clients for both Mac and PC. It's free. I've been using the free tier for a long time. It's a big company, so they actually update their features pretty regularly. It's got really neat things like while you're typing your notes, you can type the @ sign and then the name of one of your other pages, and it will link automatically to that page. Oh, so nice. if you have NPCs and you have information about those NPCs, you could just type in the name of that NPC and then it will link to that page, and then you could fill in that page with more information about the NPC. So very, very flexible tool. And
if they could just make that a hover card, then it would be amazing.
Yeah, they don't have a hover card, but it's pretty quick to like click on it and see it and then hit back and go right back. The one feature it doesn't have that is kind of, I think more important for D&D stuff than everyone else. I don't know if it's ever going to show up. I want to be able to annotate images, right? I want to be able to take a map and drop names on a map and then link those names to cards too, right? I want like an old school HTML image map. Yeah. And they don't have anything for that, so I usually have to use other tools. Anyway, what Fry Minis is bringing up is when I do my game prep, which I do on Sundays. Yeah, I always have Notion up, and the funny thing is, no matter how often I talk about it, people are still like, "What's your text editor?" Right? And like, where is it? And I'm like, I have a bot that brings the link in like every 5 minutes to just tell people I'm using Notion, and there's like a command line so that anybody in the Twitch chat can fire it up and it says, here's how Notion works, and here's a link to the article about how to use it.
Man, it sounds like Notion you should be sponsoring your streams.
They should be sponsoring my streams. Yeah. So it's a really powerful, it's a really powerful tool. Nice. and I like it. Yeah. And then the other nice thing is like you can export everything in HTML. So if you're like, I'm done with Notion, I want to use it again, you can export a whole notebook, and all of your notes and all your stuff gets dumped out in either Markdown or HTML. So you can, either archive it and keep your campaigns off. But I have like I ran almost about a year and a half Eberron campaign, and all of my notes, all of my cards, all of my info for building this homebrew Eberron campaign is in this one notebook. And it's really cool to be able to go in and futz around and go, oh yeah, that NPC was really cool, and look at these pictures. It was really.
I've been running my Monster of the Week game off of Trello, basically. I've run a couple other games that way as well.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of different ways, a lot of different campaign notebooks. There's a few World Builder. I forget the name of it. There's
World Anvil.
One that I'm forgetting. World Anvil. Yeah. So World Anvil, that's like built from the ground up as like how to prep your campaign. And there comes a point where like, I've got the system I like. And unless you have something that just blows me away, like Notion was so much better than text pages for me, that it was a big leap,
World Anvil is so like, I've played with it a couple times, but
me too. It's a little heavy.
It makes me feel dumb. I'm like,
it's a little. It's got a lot. The learning curve on that was a little high from when I play. I spent a couple hours with it, I think.
It's like, what?
I'll try everything
in this specific region. Like, it's got all the prompts and stuff, but it's like it's asking me all these questions I never even thought of.
Yeah. And somebody, Gernot Bauer mentioned Obsidian. So Obsidian is another tool. I've actually played with Obsidian as well. Yeah. Obsidian is nicer because it is just text files underneath. There's no like application. There's an application, but there's no database that's not exposed to you. Right. So it has everything is sitting in a file folder full of text files. So that if Obsidian goes away, all of your files are fine. Nice. And they're bringing up that I guess there's a bunch of plugins. There's a bunch of plugins that you can use for things like
it's overwhelming. That's the best word the best word I have for World for me personally anyway.
Yeah. I found it. That's. I mean, I was also not in the market for a new tool, I probably didn't give it a fair shake. But I do remember looking at it.
Bias. If you already have something you like using, you're comfortable.
It's really hard. Yeah, and that's like a lot of people use OneNote. I think OneNote was like the third most popular D&D tool when I did a survey of different D&D tools, and you can do like the whole lazy DM process in OneNote, and it works just fine. The one thing that OneNote doesn't have is it doesn't have this idea of like info cards, right? This idea of a database that you can then link to. It's like everything in OneNote is a page, and they're all hierarchical. which isn't the way that Notion works. But yeah, I really dig Notion. It's a cool.
At the end of the day, you just gotta figure out what works for you and stick with
Yep.
that.
Yep.
So, quick reminder, folks, there is a Kickstarter going on right now that you can check out in the description. You'll find the link. Also, some other links as well. We are just past the hour mark. Final thoughts?
No, man, this has been great. Final thoughts. I love D&D. Love playing me some D&D.
There you go. It's always great to chat with you, Mike. And until next time, everyone, stay nerdy.